Hello, hello, good day. Walking in the park with you here. I think I'll put my sunglasses back on, but just saying hello. I want to talk about manipulation today. It's a funny topic because it sounds like it's not a fun topic, but it is a fun topic. It can be a fun topic. About 10 years ago, I think, I met up with a creative writing teacher that I had when I was in college, and I had this question for him at the time. I need to twist this a little bit. Doesn't like that angle. Let's try this. There we go. I had asked him, how do you feel about the fact that when you write a story, you're manipulating people? Is that okay? And he said, of course that's okay. That's what people read for. They want to be manipulated. That's what people watch movies for, or even go to school and training for. Learning is being manipulated, right? And so the fear of being manipulative prevents us from being useful in a lot of ways. It prevents us from being the fear of being manipulative prevents us from being useful. The fear of being manipulated can prevent us from learning, right? It doesn't mean safety is not important. You have to make sure that you are learning from a reliable source, right? Like if somebody, you might know this about me, I'm really not a fan of horror movies. If somebody is making a movie designed to scare you and traumatize you, it's probably not the most reliable source, right? But people love horror movies because they love to be scared and traumatized, because it makes them feel something, and for most people that's all that they think that they can feel, or that they have a right to feel or deserve to feel. It goes really deep, the reason why people get obsessed with fear and being scared, and like it's a huge way that people self-sabotage, because the more scared we are, the less we can do in our lives, the less capable we are. People just keep exposing themselves to being manipulated by low consciousness sources, right? It's like, to me, I didn't even plan to go into this topic, but this is a funny topic. It's a big one. My analogy for a horror movie, like being manipulated by horror movies, is I'm going to go into this classroom, right? Because every story we learn something. Every story is like taking us on a ride. Every story is a classroom. So when we sign up to watch a horror movie, we're like, okay, I'm going to go into this classroom where they're going to teach me how dangerous life is, They're going to teach me how I should be like scared around every corner, and they're going to teach me how spirits and the dead are dangerous, and that death itself is dangerous and is something to be feared, right? So the filmmakers of horror movies are passing their fears along, and they're putting you through school saying, this is what you should be afraid of, and this is what you should be afraid of, and this is how you should be afraid, and this is what you should have a nightmare about tonight, and this is what should this is the trauma you should pass on to your children, right? This is like very intense, deep stuff, and people look at it like, oh, it's just a movie. And when you have these holding patterns in your body and you can't focus and you have all this anxiety, it's like, oh, well, it's just anxiety. Oh, well, it's just my body. Oh, well, it's just my life. Oh, well, it's just my perception. Oh, well, it's just this lifetime. I always have the next lifetime. It just delays the evolution unnecessarily, right? So my recommendation, obviously, don't let yourself be manipulated by fear tactics. Don't let yourself be manipulated by horror movies. Don't sign up to be in a classroom where they're teaching you how to have their traumas. It's just like, to me, it's just common sense. I used to watch horror movies, and I'm still purging those from my system. So, what do you want to be manipulated by? What about a classroom that's teaching you how to have a better relationship with yourself? How about a classroom that's teaching you how to purge your traumas? How about a classroom that's teaching you how worthy and capable you are that you didn't even realize? But then from the other side, if you are going to be the teacher of the class, if you're going to put students through a process of learning, what responsibilities are you taking to be able to do that in a really high integrity way that's going to make your imprint on this planet in a way that is really beneficial, and not just because you're greedily making, like, I'll just make any imprint, right? This is what a lot of filmmakers are filmmakers for. They just want to have an impression, and it's coming from greed and selfishness and anxiety and low self-worth. Most filmmakers are using their audiences in order to feel valuable themselves. A filmmaker who doesn't question their value is going to make more generous art. A filmmaker who doesn't question their value is going to create something that's for the audience, not for the proving of themselves, right? It's a huge difference. It's worlds apart. Most filmmakers are creating in order to make their parents think something about them, right? So that is how manipulation gets a bad rap. That's the negative version of manipulation, but there's also the positive version of manipulation. positive version of manipulation is, like I said, learning. And the most important learning we can do is learning how to differentiate between our personality, which is our false self, and our essence, which is our true self. When we can differentiate between the two, we can accomplish amazing things. We can learn, if we're learning in the right classroom, we can learn how to build our higher bodies. One of my teachers calls this building your soul. And he says that as humans, we don't have a soul, we have to build it, right? So this is our job. This is why we are on this planet, in order to build a soul. If you have an essence, but you haven't yet built your higher bodies, you haven't yet built your soul. This is an important process. Most people are watching horror movies instead of doing this process. So, are we making content that helps viewers to differentiate between their small self and their big self, right? Their personality and their essence, their ego fixation and their knowing, right? It's a big difference having our focus constricted and restricted, or expanded and available to the infinite, right? It takes a lot of work. It takes a lot of learning how to focus in new ways. It takes considerable amount of intellectual education. It takes working with others, learning how to work in groups, in partnership. It takes learning how to communicate in order to have a relationship with a teacher. It takes a lot of humility, and we're growing humility in the process. As the small self, as the personality matures, it's able to acquiesce to the essence. It's able to have more humility toward what's actually true, right? So that's what we would call like a servant ego. The ego becomes in service to the essence. Anything else is delusional. So, horror movies are reinforcing the delusion because they cause the personality, they cause the small self to grip more tightly, right? So that kind of manipulation is working when the personality becomes more fixated. You know, I literally know people who are watching horror movies and then going to therapy, and then watching horror movies and then going to therapy, and watching horror movies and then going to therapy. And they're blaming their therapist, like, oh, you know, I don't think that they know what they're talking about, or this work isn't working. But they're taking no responsibility for themselves. You are in a classroom learning how to get traumatized, and then you are in another classroom talking about how it feels. Then you're in another classroom learning how to get traumatized, right? You see what I mean? It's like, hello? What if you gave up the agenda to traumatize yourself? You'd probably have a lot higher chances of resolving the trauma if you weren't continuously creating it, right? And as filmmakers, we have such an amazing, enormous responsibility to create content which benefits people. And my approach to that, in the story weaving approach, my approach to that is we as storytellers need to go on a journey ourselves, finding more depth, more authenticity through our own storytelling process. And it doesn't even need to be about the audience. If we are giving ourselves a gift of transformation, if we're manipulating ourselves into seeing more clearly, right? Seeing with a capital S, then that non-ordinary way of seeing allows us the ability to gift our audience with a non-ordinary way of seeing as well. So being afraid, being fixated on the possibility of what's around the corner that's going to kill me, this is the opposite of non-ordinary seeing. This is the most ordinary things get, right? If I'm afraid of what is going to jump out around every corner and kill me, this is the fight, flight, freeze, fawn of the nervous system. Just switching hands here. You understand, like, the nervous system hijacks our consciousness with fear in these 4 ways, the 4 F's: fight, flight, freeze, fawn. So if we notice we have tendencies in our lives, like, why am I acting this way? Why am I behaving this way? Why am I doing that? Why am I sabotaging? Why is my communication so awful? Why am I so angry? Why am I so frustrated? Right? It's because our nervous system is habitually in fight, flight, freeze, or fawn, and we have to excavate the belief systems which are making us addicted to that, to those responses. You could literally watch a movie and extract from that movie, is this filmmaker in a fight, flight, freeze, or fawn state when they're making it, right? You can look at a movie and see what consciousness the filmmaker is making it from. I think my hourly gong went off. Some filmmakers are amazing, and then you don't, they're not transmitting a whole lot of fear. And that's what real art is. Art is creativity without the transmission of fear. When filmmakers are transmitting art that is full of fear, they are, instead of taking responsibility for their own nervous system state, they're passing it on to others, right? And this may be like, how do I say this? If they are genuinely processing it, it's not like it's bad to share their process, but if the process is still intact by the end of their artwork, it's not really artwork, right? The artwork is the process. But if it doesn't get processed, it's not done yet. It's not actually art until there's actually a transformation. That's what art is. Art is the transformation of one substance to another. It's the teleportation from one world to another, right? And if art isn't teleporting us, if art isn't transforming us, if art doesn't contain some kind of change, right? It's not actually art. It's a waste of time. It's energy which is being recycled in a habitual loop. That's why there are film tropes and what's that word? You know what word I'm talking about, right? Cliches. There are tropes and cliches because content is recycled, because that's all that people are able to see, because when our nervous system is in a fight, flight, freeze, or fawn state, which it could be one or two, or it could be all of them at the same time. When our nervous system is in a fear state, which happens to also start with F, very conveniently, we don't have access to creativity in a fear state. So what we have access to is tropes, cliches, things we've heard before, things we've seen before. We have access to memories. And they're very distorted memories. They're not, like memory already isn't real because it's just we don't remember things correctly. But in a fear state, we remember things hyper incorrectly. And so the only thing we have access to is meaningless, right? Tropes and cliches are not real because they're not alive, right? Life is palpable. Tropes and cliches are dead, right? Being in a fear state is being in a state where, in the Toltec work, I know it as being in the dead zone. The dead zone is where there is no life, right? Inside of us, if our energy is in a dead zone, we are not radiating, we're not thriving, we're not flourishing. So in order to cross that dead zone, it takes the activation of will. And that is the biggest gift as filmmakers. That's the biggest gift we can give to our audience, is permission and transformation toward the ever greater activation of their will. Nothing else is even close to being as useful as that. That is the gift. That is the gift of life. I feel satisfied with this conversation. Thanks for listening. See you next time. Let me know if you have any questions. Bye-bye.